What happens when one of America's most fearless investigative journalists sits across from one of late-night television's sharpest comedic minds, and a simple interview spirals completely out of control? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive clash that had security escorting Bob Woodward off the set of The Late Show, leaving Stephen Colbert speechless and the audience in stunned silence. This wasn't your typical promotional interview. This was a verbal warfare that exposed raw nerves and crossed lines nobody expected. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think really triggered this epic meltdown. The tension in Studio 57 was already thick as Bob Woodward settled into the guest chair, his weathered face carrying that familiar expression of someone who had spent decades uncovering uncomfortable truths. Stephen Colbert, usually the picture of controlled charm, seemed unusually on edge as he shuffled his blue cards and glanced toward his producers in the wings. "So, Bob," Stephen began, his voice carrying just a hint of that trademark coarse smirk, "your new book certainly doesn't pull any punches. You've made some pretty serious allegations about people in very high places." Woodward leaned back slightly, his fingers drumming against the arm of his chair. "Stephen, I've been doing this for over 50 years. I don't make allegations. I report facts. There's a difference." The audience chuckled nervously, sensing something brewing beneath the surface. Stephen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Right facts," Stephen said, his tone shifting just enough to signal danger ahead. "But some of these so-called facts seem to rely heavily on anonymous sources. How do we know these conversations actually happened the way you claim they did?" Woodward's jaw tensed. "Are you questioning my journalistic integrity?" "I'm asking the questions my audience deserves answers to," Stephen shot back, leaning forward in his chair. "When someone writes that a sitting president called military leaders and used language that would make a sailor blush, people want to know how you can be so certain about private conversations you weren't present for." The studio audience fell silent, the usual energy of a late-night taping replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. Woodward's eyes narrowed as he studied his host. "You know what, Stephen? I thought I was coming on a comedy show, not facing a congressional hearing. Maybe you should stick to what you do best, making jokes about politicians instead of trying to be one." Stephen's face flushed red. "Excuse me, I'm doing my job, which is asking tough questions. Just because you're used to softball interviews doesn't mean everyone has to kiss the ring." "Softball interviews?" Woodward's voice rose sharply. "Kid, I was taking down presidents when you were still doing improv in Chicago. Don't lecture me about journalism, kid." Stephen's voice cracked with indignation. "I've been in this business longer than you think, and I've earned the right to challenge anyone who sits in that chair, Pulitzer Prize or not." The tension was becoming unbearable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking toward the exits. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every heated exchange. Woodward stood up abruptly, his microphone pack falling to the floor with a loud thud. "This is ridiculous. I came here to discuss my book, not to be ambushed by someone who thinks snark equals substance." Stephen remained seated, but his voice grew cold and measured. "Sit down, Bob. We're not done here." "Oh, we're done," Woodward snapped. "More than done." But Stephen wasn't backing down. "You know what your problem is? You've been living off Watergate glory for so long that you think everyone should just accept whatever you write as gospel truth. Well, this isn't the 1970s, and I'm not some starstruck journalism student." Woodward spun around, his face now bright red with fury. My problem is sitting across from a comedian who thinks he's Edward R. Murrow. You want to know about gospel truth? The truth is that you're an entertainer playing journalist, and you're not very good at either." The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row covered their mouths in shock. Stephen's producers were frantically gesturing from the wings, but both men were too locked in their battle to notice. Stephen slowly rose from his desk, his hands pressed firmly against the surface. "An entertainer? I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, and Nobel Prize winners. I've covered elections, disasters, and historical moments that will be remembered long after your anonymous sources are forgotten." "Covered?" Woodward laughed bitterly. "You mean mocked? There's a difference between journalism and performance art, Stephen. Although I can see how someone like you might get confused." The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Stephen's face went from red to white in seconds, his knuckles now visibly clenched. "Someone like me?" Stephen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the force of a sledgehammer. "What exactly do you mean by someone like me?" Woodward realized he had stepped over a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Someone who trades substance for laughs. Who thinks political commentary is the same as investigative reporting. Someone who... Stop. Stephen's voice cut through the studio like a blade. Just stop talking. But Woodward couldn't stop. The years of frustration with changing media landscapes, with comedians being taken as seriously as traditional journalists, all came pouring out. The truth is, Stephen, shows like yours have turned political discourse into a circus. Real journalism requires patience, dedication, and sacrifice. It means following leads for months, verifying sources, building cases brick by brick. What you do is take someone else's reporting and make jokes about it. Stephen's composure finally cracked completely. Get out. What? I said get out. Security. The studio erupted in chaos as two large security guards appeared from the wings, moving swiftly toward Woodward's position. Woodward held up his hands as the security guards approached, his face a mixture of defiance and disbelief. You're seriously going to have me escorted out like some common troublemaker? You made your choice when you decided to insult me and my work in front of my audience, Stephen replied, his voice still trembling with rage. This is my show, my stage, and my rules. The security guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them, a tall man with graying temples, spoke quietly to Woodward. Sir, if you could just come with us, we can sort this out backstage. No, Woodward said firmly, turning back to face Stephen. I'm not going anywhere until this man apologizes to his audience for turning what should have been a professional interview into a personal attack. Stephen let out a harsh laugh. Apologize? You're the one who came on my show and basically called me a fraud. You want an apology? Here's your apology. I'm sorry I ever thought you were worth having. And the audience was completely silent now, watching this train wreck unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some people were filming with their phones, despite strict no-recording policies. Woodward stepped closer to Stephen's desk, ignoring the security guards flanking him. You know what, Stephen? I've been thinking about what you said about me living off Watergate glory. That's rich coming from a man whose entire career is built on reading other people's work and making fun of it. Other people's work? Stephen's voice rose to nearly a shout. I've broken stories. I've exposed corruption. I've held politicians accountable in ways your precious anonymous sources never could. At least when I ask tough questions, I do it with my name attached, not hiding behind deep background and off-the-record conversations. My sources risk their careers, sometimes their lives, to expose the truth, Woodward shot back. Your sources are whatever trending topic your writers found on social media that morning. There's a difference between accountability journalism and entertainment masquerading as news. Stephen walked around his desk, now standing face to face with Woodward. Entertainment? You think this is entertainment? I've had dictators refuse to come on my show because they know I'll ask the questions they don't want to answer. I've had politicians storm off my set because they couldn't handle the heat. And you, Bob Woodward, legendary investigative reporter, are about to join that list because you can't handle being challenged. Challenged? Woodward's laugh was bitter and cold. This isn't a challenge. It's an ambush. You brought me here under false pretenses, pretending you wanted to discuss my book when what you really wanted was to score points with your audience by taking down a respected journalist. The tension between them was electric. Both men breathing heavily, neither willing to back down. The security guards looked to the producers in the wings, who were frantically trying to decide whether to cut the cameras or let this spectacular disaster continue. Stephen's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Respected journalist? Bob, when was the last time you actually broke a story that mattered? When was the last time your reporting changed anything? You've become a relic trading on past glory, while the real work of holding power accountable happens on shows like mine. Woodward's face went white with fury. Real work. You sit behind a desk and make jokes about people who are actually out there doing the hard work of democracy. You're a court jester who thinks he's a king. And you're a has-been who thinks his name still carries weight, Stephen fired back. The world has moved on, Bob. Journalism has evolved. People don't want to wait months for some mysterious source to leak information through official channels. They want accountability now in real time with real consequences. What they want, Woodward said through gritted teeth, is exactly what you give them. Quick hits, surface-level analysis, and the comfortable feeling that complex problems have simple solutions. That's not journalism. That's fast food. Stephen stepped even closer, now inches from Woodward's face. At least my fast food feeds people. Your haute cuisine journalism sits on bookshelves collecting dust while the world burns around us. When was the last time one of your carefully sourced, meticulously researched articles actually stopped a corrupt politician or prevented a disaster? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Woodward's mouth opened and closed several times, his usual confidence shaken by the directness of the attack. That's not how journalism works, he finally managed. We don't measure success by immediate impact. We document history. We preserve truth. We bore people to death while pretending we're saving democracy, Stephen interrupted. Bob, the reason you're so angry isn't because I questioned your methods. It's because deep down you know I'm right. Your type of journalism is dying and shows like mine are what's replacing it. Woodward's hands were shaking now, whether from anger or something else entirely. If that's true, then we're all doomed. If entertainment becomes our primary source of information, if comedy replaces investigation, if sound bites replace substance, then we've lost everything that makes a free press valuable. Maybe, Stephen said quietly, his own anger seeming to cool slightly. Or maybe we've finally found a way to make people actually care about the truth instead of ignoring it. The moment of near civility was shattered when Woodward spoke again. Care about the truth? Stephen, your audience doesn't care about truth. They care about feeling superior to the people you mock. They don't watch your show to learn. They watch it to feel smug about their political opinions. Stephen's face hardened again. And your readers don't buy your books to learn either, Bob. They buy them to feel like they're getting inside information, like they're part of some exclusive club that knows the real story. We're both in the business of making people feel special. The only difference is I'm honest about it. The difference, Woodward said, his voice rising again, is that I actually uncover real information instead of just repackaging what everyone already knows with a punchline attached. One of the security guards finally stepped forward. Gentlemen, we really need to. Stay out of this, both men said simultaneously, then glared at each other for the unintended unity. Stephen turned to his audience, many of whom were still recording despite the rules. Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing something remarkable here. A man who helped bring down a president is having a complete meltdown because someone asked him tough questions about his work. Woodward whirled around to face the audience directly. What you're witnessing is the death of real journalism, replaced by performers who think wit is a substitute for wisdom. Performers? Stephen's voice cracked with indignation. Bob, you've been performing for 50 years. The only difference is your stage was newspaper pages and mine is television. We're both entertainers. I'm just honest about it. The accusation seemed to break something inside Woodward. His composure, carefully maintained throughout decades of high-pressure interviews and confrontations, finally crumbled completely. You want to know about performing? Woodward's voice cracked as he pointed an accusatory finger at Stephen. Every single day I wake up and perform the role of objective journalist while watching people like you turn my profession into a punchline. Every interview I do, every source I protect, every story I verify. I'm performing the dying art of actual reporting while you get praised for reading headlines and making faces. The raw honesty in his voice caught everyone off guard. For a moment, the studio was completely silent, except for the hum of cameras still rolling. Stephen's expression softened slightly, perhaps recognizing the genuine pain behind Woodward's anger. Bob, I never said journalism was dead. I said it was evolving. Maybe the problem isn't that people like me exist. Maybe the problem is that people like you refuse to adapt. Adapt? Woodward laughed bitterly. You mean sell out? You mean trade integrity for ratings, substance for laughs, truth for applause? Is that what you call adaptation? I call it survival, Stephen replied, his voice now calmer, but no less intense. The world changed, Bob. People's attention spans changed. Their media consumption habits changed. Their trust in institutions changed. You can either change with them or become irrelevant. Then I choose irrelevance, Woodward said firmly. I'd rather be irrelevant and right than popular and meaningless. Stephen shook his head. That's exactly the kind of sanctimonious attitude that drove people away from traditional journalism in the first place. You act like you're the guardian of some sacred truth, but all you're really guarding is your own ego. My ego? Woodward's voice rose to a near shout. My ego didn't expose Watergate, didn't reveal government corruption, didn't hold presidents accountable for their actions. My work did that. Work that required sacrifice and dedication and principles that apparently don't matter anymore. Your work mattered then, Stephen said quietly. But what have you done lately? Besides writing books that tell us things we already suspected about politicians we already knew were corrupt. Where's the next Watergate, Bob? Where's the investigation that actually changes something instead of just confirming what everyone already believes? The question hit Woodward like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed genuinely vulnerable. You think it's easy? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You think I haven't tried? You think I haven't spent sleepless nights chasing leads that go nowhere? Sources that disappear, stories that die because nobody wants to hear them anymore? The system I helped create to protect whistleblowers and expose corruption has been dismantled piece by piece, and shows like you're celebrating the destruction. Stephen's expression grew more serious. I'm not celebrating anything, Bob. I'm trying to keep people engaged with important issues in the only way that seems to work anymore. If making jokes about corrupt politicians keeps people paying attention to corruption, then maybe that's what needs to happen. But at what cost? Woodward asked, stepping closer to Stephen again. When everything becomes a joke, when every serious issue gets reduced to a punchline, what happens to the gravity of real problems? What happens to the respect for institutions, for expertise, for the hard work of understanding complex issues? Maybe those institutions need to earn respect instead of demanding it, Stephen shot back. Maybe expertise needs to prove its value instead of hiding behind credentials. Maybe the hard work of understanding complex issues needs to be made accessible to people instead of locked away in academic journals and anonymous sources. Woodward stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You really believe that, don't you? You really think you're doing something noble here? I think I'm doing something necessary, Stephen replied. Just like you think what you're doing is necessary. The difference is I'm willing to admit that my way isn't perfect. And I'm not. Are you? The challenge hung between them like a bridge neither man seemed willing to cross. The audience, the security guards, even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath waiting for Woodward's response. No, he said finally, his voice heavy with something that might have been defeat or acceptance. No, I'm not willing to admit that because if I admit that my way isn't perfect, if I acknowledge that maybe entertainment and journalism can coexist, then I have to face the possibility that everything I've built my life on might be wrong. Stephen nodded slowly. And if I admit that maybe there's value in your approach, maybe there's something lost when everything becomes entertainment, then I have to question whether what I'm doing is actually helping or just making people feel better about not understanding the world around them. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually reach some kind of understanding, some common ground between their opposing worldviews. But then Woodward straightened up, his professional mask sliding back into place. But I'm not ready to have that conversation, he said firmly. Not here. Not like this. Not in front of cameras that will turn whatever I say into content for people to consume and forget. Stephen's own mask returned as well. Then we're back where we started. No, Woodward said, turning toward the security guards who had been waiting patiently throughout the entire exchange. We're done where we started. Gentlemen, I'm ready to go. The security guards looked relieved as they moved to escort Woodward toward the exit. But as they reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time. Stephen, he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned studio. When this airs, when people watch this and laugh about the old journalist who couldn't handle being challenged, I want you to remember something. The reason I got so angry tonight wasn't because you questioned my methods or my sources or my relevance. It was because part of me knows you might be right. And I'm terrified of what that means for everything I've spent my life believing in. Stephen stood frozen behind his desk, clearly unprepared for such a raw admission. The audience remained silent, sensing they had witnessed something far more significant than a typical celebrity feud. And Bob, Stephen called out as Woodward reached the exit. When you write about this, when you inevitably turn tonight into another chapter about the decline of civil discourse, remember that the reason I pushed so hard wasn't because I don't respect what you've accomplished. It was because I'm terrified that people like me are all that's left to do the job you used to do. And I'm not sure we're good enough. Woodward paused at the threshold, his hand on the door frame. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around, might continue the conversation, might find some way to bridge the gap between their worlds. Instead, he simply nodded once and walked out, leaving Stephen alone on stage with an audience that had no idea how to react to what they had just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling as Stephen returned to his desk, straightened his tie, and looked directly into the camera. His usual confident smile was nowhere to be found, replaced by something more complex and uncertain. "Well," he said quietly, "that wasn't exactly how I planned to end the show tonight." The audience remained silent, unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, applaud, or simply process what they had experienced. In that silence, both men's words hung in the air like questions that would never be fully answered, challenges that would never be completely resolved, and truths that would never be entirely comfortable. So, what do you think really caused this explosive confrontation to spiral so far out of control? Was it a clash of egos, a generational divide, or something deeper about the changing nature of how we consume information? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.